Good morning and welcome to Bright Church of Christ today, and thanks again to Adam and Josh just for leading us in worship just now, and just encourage you to stay engaged with the Holy Spirit and just allow Him to speak into your life as we gather around His Word, and just try to engage with His purpose, His plan, and what He might want to release amongst us in the months ahead. A couple of weeks ago, we sort of introduced a topic and started asking a question. How would you like to have a congregation that just automatically kept on? Okay, so our video seemed to have dropped out there for some reason. Sorry about that. So just continuing our message this morning. This was a discovery of 8 quality characteristics that contributed to churches flourishing and growing. And this little model was used to illustrate them, where the amount of water in the barrel was represented the participation, the number of people participating in the congregation. Each of these 8 staves represented one of the quality characteristics that had been discovered. And the shortest stave was a limiting factor on the growth of the congregation. So it's very important that all of these 8 quality characteristics were in play all the time, that none of them were neglected, and that none of them were missing. And this was the major discovery, I guess, of this research, that if all of these 8 characteristics were employed, and all of them were attended to and nurtured and continued to grow, then the church would continue to grow. And what this research showed was that quality goals were more important than numerical goals. So rather than saying we will have 200 people in our church by 2023, it was more productive to have a goal such as this. By 2022, 80% of our people will understand their spiritual gifts. Or in 2021, we will make our worship services more inspiring for the people who come. Or in 2021, we will look at finding ways of doing outreach that meet the needs of people in our community. Or our goal in the next 3 months is to help people to rediscover their spiritual passion. These were the kind of goals that emanated from these quality characteristics that would really support and undergird the growth of a church. So the last 2 weeks, we looked at 3 of these quality characteristics. Empowering leadership. All churches have leaders, but not all church leaders are focused on empowering other people in their church to flourish. We looked at gift-oriented ministry. All churches attempt to do ministry, but not all churches orient their ministry program around the spiritual gifts that God has placed in the people in the group. Then we talked about passionate spirituality. All Christians have spiritual practices, but not all are passionate about them. So we talked about how we can, rediscover spiritual passion in our lives. There's some other principles here. Holistic small groups that address all of the personal needs that we have in ministry, not just focused on one issue. Another of these characteristics is loving relationships, not just relationships, but loving relationships, need-oriented evangelism. And today we want to talk about functional structures. And so this is a bit of an interesting topic. And basically the principle here is that all churches have structures, but not all structures are designed for their present functions. Doesn't sound like a very exciting topic, but it does become very, very relevant when we're navigating transition, planning for the future, wanting to be effective, looking at making some tweaks and changes, even in the AGM, some of the things on the voting slip that you guys will have received by email. when we talk about structure in ministry, we're talking about things like leadership models, buildings, orders of service, furniture, the way we organize ministries like pastoral care and small groups and outreach, constitution, policy, a lot of the things that happen in the background. It can all sound very, very boring to a lot of people, but it does have massive impact on ministry development. And there's a tension here because some people, think, should we structure can be overemphasized. Others think it can be underemphasized. And many of us can become really skeptical about structure in the church. We're not really that interested in investing in another organization. We're not that interested in committees and boards and constitutions and voting and building programs and working bees, routines, rosters. It all sort of sounds quite unspiritual, and sometimes the significance of these things can be overestimated, and we can think all that we need to do to grow the church is put the right structures in place. On the other hand, some of us can be skeptical about those who completely dismiss structure and only emphasize, what we might call more spiritual kind of issues. If we underestimate the importance of structure, we can end up with no permanent progress and growth. We can become, the same small group of people happily meeting together year after year, but not really growing and not really creating impact around us because we don't have the structure in which the spiritual aspects of the ministry can flourish and grow. So some people are skeptical of structures and see them unspiritual, sort of come to sort of thinking that structures and programs quench the life of the Spirit. But in actual fact, many times good structures, the right structures and the right programs facilitate the life of the Spirit. And it's a matter of tweaking and changing and building the structures in the life of the church that actually facilitate what God is doing now and what God wants to do in the present and in the future, the things that are coming. So one of the ways that you can think about this is to think about a vine growing on a trellis. A trellis system simply provides a structure for a vine to grow on. Without the structure, the vine will just lay on the ground. That is why the vineyard put in all the posts and stretch out all the wires and place the vines beneath these and then lift the branches up and put them upon these structures and wires so they can grow and spread and flourish. If the vine outgrows that trellis, then these extra branches just begin to trail along the ground again. So if we want to support a bigger vine, it calls for actually a bigger trellis. If you can get a more effective trellis, a better designed trellis, then as a business person wanting to have a successful project of growing and marketing grapes, they will invest in changing it, in changing the structure, changing the trellis, because it will produce more growth on the vine. The only purpose of the trellis is to support the vine. The trellis itself is never the focus. In fact, the trellis disappears into the background as the vine grows and wraps itself around it, and you have to sort of eventually look in between the leaves to find where the trellis is, but it's there and it's supporting the growth of the vine. The farmer delights not in the trellis itself, but in the fruitfulness that is possible because of the trellis underpinning the growth of the vine. So his excitement about a great trellis would be not about the trellis itself. He doesn't leave it empty and invite all his friends to come and admire this magnificent trellis that he's built. No, any excitement he would feel about the trellis is because it facilitates growth of his vine and growth of his endeavors in his vine growing project. We need to think about church and ministry structures something like this. What is the capacity of the structures in the church to support mission and ministry? Can they be improved? Can they be changed for something better? Are there structures that are redundant, that should be done away with? Are there new structures that should be introduced that are more relevant? Can we achieve better results with less effort by just changing the way that we do stuff? Can the structures be adjusted and shaped now to accommodate future growth, or to allow space for more people to come in, to put the church in a position where God says, hey, I can bring more people into this group because they've got the structures to accommodate growth and minister to more people. So we don't want to be like a farmer, who wants a bigger crop and looks at his small, limited, maybe outdated trellis in his paddock and says, well, we've always done this way, that'll be okay, that'll be good enough, it worked before, why change it? It worked in the, it's been there for years, my dad built it, his dad built it, why are we going to change it? But there's a new idea, there's a better way, and so he needs to think about that if he wants to build, to have larger vines with more fruit on them. This kind of thinking suggests effective structures in ministry facilitate a greater move of the Spirit and support the current mission of the congregation, allowing it to hold on to growth and integrate growth and new people into the life of the group. The structures are never the focus. They're never the end game. They're never the goal, but they're there to support the mission. And they need to be reviewed and adjusted to suit their function. Now, of all these 8 quality characteristics, passionate spirituality, inspiring worship services, some of these are, they're quite exciting concepts, but this one, functional structures, they found was the most controversial and produced the most resistance, because when you try to change structure, there's often that comeback, it's always been done this way around here. Why do we have to change it? We've always met at this time. We've always arranged the furniture like this. This governance model has been in place for decades. It's worked up till now. Why change it? In fact, this whole survey about natural church development identified this as the greatest stumbling block to change, was bondage or adherence to traditional structures. In high quality growing churches, only 8% of people said, I consider our church to be tradition bound. But in small declining churches, 50% of the people said, I think our church is bound up by tradition. So structure is not addressed massively in the New Testament, or to the extent of technical detail that we face every day in the 21st century. The churches in the New Testament were mainly fluid, pioneering house churches. They didn't have this so much government regulation that they had to connect with. They didn't have buildings and campuses and projection setups and bands, and they didn't even have established Christian traditions that obviously exist throughout the church today. But the Bible does certainly have biographies of some great administrators, particularly people like Nehemiah and Joseph. So God is not anti-structure or anti-management. He just wants to use our capacity to structure and organize things in ways that will facilitate and prioritize mission and ministry, not stifle it. So the goal is to structure things in a way that what we're doing will expand and grow. When the Bible talks about church, it does talk about, it does talk in terms of organization, and it talks in terms of the church being an organism, like a body or a vine. It talks as an organization, like a temple or a building. So we have verses like this in 1 Peter 2, verse 5. You as living stones are being built up into a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So we have the idea that each of us is a living stone, but we are being built into a house. We're being organized into a house. We're also described as members individually of the body of Christ. So each of us is like a little part of the body of Christ in our local church, but we're being organized together, fitted together through relationships to be a body of people that can accomplish something together. Paul also says in 1 Corinthians 3:9, we're God's fellow workers. You are God's field, you are God's building. So we have both this idea of building, construction, architecture, temple, and we have the idea of organism, vine, body, organic life. They're both there. So the reality for us in the 21st century is that the church is established in so many different cultures, and it has to adapt its structure to the local culture, to the legal and built environments, and the shifting demands of mission and ministry that are out there all around us. As the church grows, it needs to have some of these structural elements in place, like the trellis is needed for the vine. We need certain elements of organization to enable what we're doing to grow and increase and flourish. So our goal, when we look at all of the structures in the church, all the leadership models and the buildings and the governance and orders of service and all these kinds of things, our goal should constantly be in designing and implementing structure that will accommodate the next phase of growth. Do we need a bigger trellis? Do we need a stronger trellis? Do we need a watering system? Do we need better fertilizer? This would be the questions that would be being asked by a farmer, but we need to ask similar questions. Is this structure that's sort of worked okay up till now, is that going to stand us in good stead in the next decade, or do we need to adjust it? This means it will probably require more complexity and more detail. So we can say, well, we've got 90 odd people, so let's design a structure that will accommodate 150. So there's space for more people to come in. If you maintain what worked for 50 people and it's stretching a bit at the seams with 80 or 90, this can be like an unseen cap on the growth of the organization and stopping this natural automatic growth of God's kingdom taking place, because it's stifled by an organization that doesn't fit the moment. So don't be limited to what works now. We need to, we don't want to be limited and just to maintain what we've got. It's a mistake to think that what worked up till now will work in the future. The other aspect of this is that casual, unstructured organizations can also be limited by the capacity and stamina of a few people, and bringing in some structure and some organization can actually relieve that and spread the load and enable the organization to expand. So we're constantly shaping and reshaping the way that we structure what we do to support current objectives, current missional goals, current ministry goals. What is going to work to cause what we want to do to flourish now and in the foreseeable future? Is a certain structure, this is the question that we must ask about things, is a certain structure supporting or hindering the mission? So you might have an example like this. You might have an issue of scheduling, for example. You might have a church where suddenly there's heaps of young families in the church, and all the kids are involved in sports, but the sports are scheduled on Sunday morning. So you can say, well, they shouldn't run sport on Sunday morning because that's traditionally the day for church, and you could stop the kids doing sport and make them come to church and make them resentful. Or you could say, Sunday morning doesn't work for our church because so many of our kids are involved, in this activity, which is important for them and for their growth. Why don't we do church on Friday night or Saturday night? And then why don't we all go and get engaged with these sporting activities that our kids are involved with and connect with the community? So it's adapting the structure to suit the need, making the structure function in the current objectives of the church. These sort of issues come up all the time about worship services. We want to worship the Father in spirit and truth, but we also want to use a musical style that's appealing to the demographic we're trying to reach, the people we want to reach. We don't want people coming in and thinking, I don't get this. I don't understand this music. I don't relate to it. So, worship services are always, and orders of service, they're always born in a certain era, in a certain move of the Spirit, with a certain kind of music. And obviously Bright Church of Christ decided some years ago to transition to contemporary music, which is really a smart move because people out there understand contemporary music. No doubt other challenges will come in the future. And, it's a challenge because, we all have sentimentality about the things that we like. We all have our favorite music, and that kind of sentimentality can lock us into a dysfunctional tradition, a dysfunctional sort of way of doing things that's no longer supporting growth. It's no longer the right kind of trellis for the vine in the here and now. Could be a clunky order of service from a bygone era where, things stop and start all the time and inhibit the flow of the Spirit that attracts people in the 21st century. So then you have to ask, is the structure, is the order of service, is the style appealing to the people you want to reach? This is, of course, not about changing the gospel or changing the message or anything like that. It's just about the package. And all of the packages that are out there today, none of them were actually practiced in the New Testament. So we want to bring the principles of ministry from the New Testament and fit them into some kind of model that works in the culture in which we're called to. I was involved in a church in the inner city in the 1980s, and it had a structure that wasn't working. It had sort of an old traditional Church of Christ structure from, the probably 1950s and 1960s that they were practicing. The church was declined to a handful of people. And they knew that it wasn't working, so they decided to change it. And they brought in contemporary music. They got rid of all the furnishing in the church, brought in tables, and they ran like a cafe-style church. And people started to come, like a lot of people started to come. Very trendy in the 1980s, pretty normal these days. And the church started to grow and ministry started to take place. People started to get saved and baptized and healed and filled with the Holy Spirit. And for many years, the church flourished and grew with that model that was relevant to the people that lived around in that area at the time. They're doing something different now, I'm sure, but at that time, it was very effective. But, this creates a tension because some people loved the old structure. I remember one gentleman getting really upset about the way people were folding the communion cloth, that they weren't doing it the way that they'd always done it. This was like some cloth that was placed over the communion elements during the service. And so it really was challenging to some people to change, but by changing the structure, the function of the church was enhanced dramatically. Okay, sorry about that. Something's happening with our transmission today, but this will be part 3 of our message this morning. Okay, so so some of this adjustment and this shifting from a pastor-centric model to a small group model centered around training leaders can be challenging to some people who have sort of grown up and they find that hard to understand. And the status quo may resist such a change in structure. But if it's adopted and accepted and encouraged and practiced and the right training goes into place, then there is capacity for unlimited growth. So if this is put in place, is the pastor doing his job? Yes, because his job is to equip others. His job is actually not to be the central focus of everything that happens, but to equip other people so that the reach of the ministry can grow and expand. And he or she then invests their time in the small group leaders, empowering them to exercise their spiritual gifts and be the people that God has called them to be in caring for others. There's other challenges in the area of leadership. We all have leadership structures. Some leadership structures are quite undefined. People are in leadership positions and roles. They don't really know what their role is or what's expected. So sometimes we need to develop a structure that brings clarity and security to people in leadership. They actually understand who or what they're meant to be doing, what their role is, what their responsibilities are, to have some kind of review process where they can reflect about, how they're traveling. Are they enjoying it? Is it working? Do they want to tweak things? All of these kinds of things can be extremely helpful. This is part of what we're implementing at the moment. Role descriptions and review process for pastors, elders, deacons and ministry area leaders. They help the church to grow. It creates that trellis on which the vine can grow and creep and expand. We also look at things like governance. The way a church is governed is a structural framework for the church to grow in, and it's not always up to date. We have to ask, does it serve contemporary ministry and mission? Was it designed for a different era where it worked amazingly well, but now there needs to be some changing and tweaking and adjusting? So through the work of the transition team, we've been sort of looking at a few of those issues. There's an intention to really replan and rewrite and reorganize things in a more in-depth way in the next couple of years, but there are some minor options for you guys to consider at the moment on the on the voting slip that you'll have received. So this quality characteristic is about having tools that are fit for purpose, tools that will be useful and not stifling in advancing the mission of the church. We need continual renewing, reviewing of structures and methods. If it doesn't work, if what worked years ago doesn't work anymore, or what worked yesterday doesn't work anymore, we change it. What actually happens is all these structures that are in place, they define the culture of the organization. These are all the unnoticed, taken for granted, but powerfully present elements that shape our lives and work. We just habitually default back to these things that we've always done. They're so embedded in our thinking, they're so embedded in the way people relate to each other, they're so embedded in our habits that we tend to just do it subconsciously and keep reproducing the same kind of results. These are things that happen automatically. They're not always the values that we aspire to, but they're the values, just the values that are embedded in the way we do stuff. And one way we cope with stress and challenge is just by going to what's familiar. It's normal to go back to what is familiar, what is subconsciously just the way we do things in our minds. And because of that, culture will trump strategy. You try to introduce a new strategy and the old culture will tend to just take over again unless you're very intentional about saying, hey, no, we're going to change. We're going to meet in a different building. We're going to change our order of service. We're going to change the way that we organize pastoral care. We're going to change our leadership structure. We have to be very conscious about it, or we just slip back into old practices. There's a saying in one of the leadership books by Todd Bolsinger that culture... Okay, take four. Not take four, just the last bit. Okay, so the new wine goes into the old wineskin, and it bursts the wineskin because it's rigid. The wineskin first needs to be softened and renewed, so then, or a new wineskin be used to contain the new wine. And then he makes this statement, no one having drunk old wine immediately desires new, for he says the old is better. This is a very challenging principle from Jesus. His disciples' behavior was challenging the culture of the day because of the habit of fasting twice a week. And they're going, why the change? Why this? Why are you doing that? We've always done it this way. This is what everyone does. Why do you want to do it differently? So Jesus frames his answer around a higher purpose than the tradition. The higher purpose was his presence, not the fasting. And we need to do that. Our higher purpose is our mission, and our ministry activities, not the structure that we use. The highest purpose is not the constitution or the order of service or the building or the architecture. The highest purpose is reaching people for Jesus and doing it as effectively as we can. So Jesus gives them an answer to fit their context about fasting now and fasting in the future, but he leaves us with this timeless principle for all ages, for all people. No one having drunk old wine immediately desires the new, because they say the old tastes better. This is something that we face when confronted with change. We tend to say the old tastes better. We tend to say the old thing that we've always done is fine, it's better than the new. But God is creative. And God is advancing the mission of the church, and he's revealing new strategies decade by decade and situation by situation and context by context. He's saying, hey, change the structure, do something differently, change the shape of the trellis, build a bigger trellis, move the trellis to a better location, put in a watering system, do this and do that. And then for the same amount of effort, you'll get more growth because the structure is not stifling the growth that he wants to bring. So dysfunctional structures can be the shortest stave in the barrel. We can have great worship, great loving relationships, fantastic small groups, but dysfunctional structures is one of the things that can inhibit growth, spiritual growth and numeric growth in mission and in ministry. So this is one of the things that we need to, at times to stand back and review and say, are our structures fit for purpose now? Are they fulfilling our purpose now? Or is it time to adjust them and to change them and to reflect on what might work better in the immediate situation, but also to preparing for the season to come, to build a better, bigger, more robust trellis so we can grow bigger grapevines next year, and the added growth won't be trailing on the ground, but it will be supported. Amen. So there's our 4-part message this morning. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened, but we'll be in our group soon. And we can just engage and share about some of these things and share communion, pray for one another. And look forward to catching up with everybody soon. Bless you.